Tell me about Brandon.
Brandon was diagnosed with cancer when he was just a month old. I was 33 weeks pregnant with him when an ultrasound showed that he had a tumor on his spine. The doctor at the time didn't know for sure what it was, but suggested that it might be a form of pediatric cancer called neuroblastoma. And I thought that was the craziest thing I had ever heard, that an unborn baby could have cancer.
How do you treat a 1-month-old with cancer?
Because the tumor was on his spine and it had legs that extended into his spinal canal, they didn't feel like it was safe to do surgery and try to remove the tumor. We were advised to just hold on and wait. They did MRIs on Brandon every 6 weeks. It's crazy, but the day before his surgery, he had another MRI, and the doctor called us in and said, I don't know how to tell you this, but that the tumor is gone. It had literally melted away like overnight.
That is incredible. You were a lawyer at the time, and you made the transition to now being CEO of Cure Childhood Cancer.
Less than 4% of cancer research funding from the federal government goes to look at pediatric cancers. 95% of childhood cancer survivors will have some kind of chronic negative health effect by the time they're 40 years old. 7 drugs have been created and FDA approved specifically for childhood cancer, compared to over 200 for cancers that affect adults. I just couldn't, not do something.
Kristin, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Tell me about Brandon.
So Brandon is my now 23-year-old, so I'll give you that spoiler first, but Brandon was actually diagnosed with cancer when he was just a month old. I was 33 weeks pregnant with him when an ultrasound showed that he had a tumor on his spine, and the doctor at the time didn't know for sure what it was, but suggested that it might be a form of pediatric cancer called neuroblastoma. And I thought that was the craziest thing I had ever heard, that an unborn baby could have cancer. And so it was 3 weeks from the time they found the tumor until I delivered him, and they were able to officially diagnose him at a month old. And it was, in fact, the worst of possibilities. It was neuroblastoma.
So he's 1 month old. He's diagnosed with neuroblastoma. Day one, what happens? How do you treat a 1-month-old with cancer?
Well, it was complicated, as you can imagine. He was early, and so he had premature lungs and couldn't be put under anesthesia at that age because of that, and also developed RSV, which was another complicating factor. And because the tumor was on his spine and it had legs that extended into his spinal canal, they didn't feel like it was safe to do surgery and try to remove the tumor. So we were advised to just hold on and wait and watch it very carefully. There are actually 2 forms of neuroblastoma. One is very high risk, very difficult to treat, low survival rate. And the other is a type that can affect infants. And it is completely different biologically, and it can regress on its own without treatment. And so because he was born with it and wasn't symptomatic when they found it, they wanted to wait and see if we could tell which kind it was before they intervened. So we waited, really in part because it was not safe to do surgery or put him under anesthesia. And if the tumor had not been on his spine, they would have done surgery to, look at it under a microscope to be able to tell whether his risk was very high or low. But So they did MRIs on Brandon every 6 weeks. So he had to be sedated for that for almost 2 years. And what they told us was that if it was the more favorable kind, we would see a pattern of regression, and it wouldn't just melt away overnight, but we would be able to tell over time that it was shrinking, and that if we didn't see that pattern by the time he turned 2, that it was unlikely to be the more favorable kind. So we just waited and did scans very frequently, and the pattern did not occur in Brandon. When he was 2, he started showing symptoms of bony pain, and our doctors thought that it was in fact like activating, so to speak. Like, they think that with the more difficult kind of neuroblastoma, some of those kids are born with it, and for some reason at some point a switch flips and it becomes very malignant acting, and so they thought that was what was taking place with Brandon. And we went to actually San Francisco to see a neurosurgeon who felt like he could get to the tumor without disassembling his spine. And it's crazy, but the day before his surgery, he had another MRI, and the doctor called us in and said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but that the tumor is gone." And so it had literally melted away like overnight. He had just had emergency scans done here in Atlanta before we went to San Francisco, because they thought it was, it was activating, so to speak, and it was there just as it had been for the 2 years. But the day before his surgery, it just went away. It was just gone. And so they followed him for 5 years and continued to scan, and it never came back. And he's been great, ever since.
That is incredible.
It is.
How did you manage the waiting process? Did it kind of feel like just optimism where you're trying to ignore it? Was it extremely difficult? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I wish that was my makeup, to be optimistic and not worry. My mom is very much like that, and my mom was very much like, we'll worry about it if we have to. But for me, it was kind of torture, to be honest. I learned as much as I could about neuroblastoma, and it's a really scary diagnosis. And I got to know families. This was in the day before, social media and easy ways to connect with other families. But I did meet a number of families through a listserv online whose kids had neuroblastoma, and those kids were not doing well. I mean, it was really, really scary to watch. And so I think for us, we also there was confusion with some of his scans, and, is it a little smaller? Is it a little bigger? Like, in my very unsophisticated brain, I thought, it's got to be easy. You just like, can't you just mark it and then mark one end, mark the other end, and measure? And of course, it's not that simple. But I think the lack of clarity with the scans made it really difficult, and fearing that we were waiting too long. I did talk to a number of experts around the country that deal with neuroblastoma in babies, and there was not a consensus at all in terms of what we should do. And I had doctors telling us that we were playing Russian roulette and that we needed to get it out. And then I had other doctors who said, but if you do that and it causes permanent damage to him, they were really concerned with the motor nerves that ran through the tumor, and they would have had to have sacrificed those nerves to get the tumor, and he could have been paralyzed, and what if you did that and you didn't need to do that? And it just was so hard to know what to do for him.
What led you to making the decision to wait? I mean, I'm sure there's other people out there that are in the same scenario, getting all of those different opinions. What led you ultimately to choose to wait?
Well, in the beginning, we waited because we didn't have a choice because he got RSV. He couldn't be put under anesthesia for surgery. So even though we had a difference of opinion, even at the beginning, there were two hospitals here in Atlanta, and one group of oncologists at one of them said we should wait, and the other group at the other hospital, and it's one healthcare system, by the way, said it's dangerous to wait. We need to get it. And they came to us and said, you could go either way, you decide. And I mean, we aren't qualified to decide that. And it was incredibly stressful. And so in the beginning, the decision was made for us because he couldn't undergo the surgery. And then by the time it would have been safe, it was time to scan him again. And then it was like, well, maybe it's shrinking a little. So then we waited again. And then it was like, well, maybe it's growing a little. I mean, it was just, so I feel like we didn't decide like we're going to wait for a long time. It was like, we'll wait till the next scan and see if there's a pattern and one way or the other. And it just turned out that continued for 2 years. And then, we hit that point where they said, if we get to 2 years and there's no pattern, it's not the favorable kind. So that's where we were. And we were ready and had a surgeon that felt comfortable trying to do it. And a doctor that said it's not safe to wait any longer.
Yeah. Did they ever find out any explanation for why it went away?
There is no explanation. I mean, it depends on what you believe. I believe it was, a bit kind of a miracle, to us it was. And I think, I've heard doctors say, well, we know that happens sometimes with this infantile neuroblastoma. And I say, but they told us it wouldn't melt away and that it would happen over time. And this one literally melted away overnight. And so I don't know. We've never been offered any real explanation. Sometimes these things happen and you just say thank you and,
Don't ask
and
more
move
questions.
and move on and move ahead. Yeah.
And during this time, you were a lawyer, correct?
Yes.
So you were a lawyer at the time, and you made the transition to now being CEO of Cure Childhood Cancer. Tell me about that transition.
Well, that also didn't happen overnight. So Brandon was declared cancer-free and it was November of 2003. And I really, I had met a number of families who were going through cancer with their children and who were going through so much. And really, I had a friend whose child was going through a bone marrow transplant, and I had never seen anything as horrific as that ever. And so while we were so thankful for what was happening with Brandon, I mean, at first I thought they'd made a mistake, but once I was convinced it wasn't a mistake, so thankful, but in some ways felt almost a little bit guilty because like we didn't go through anything comparatively, and no chemo, no surgery. And these other children that we knew were really suffering. And then I had a friend whose son died. And that was the first time I had ever experienced that, a 6-year-old, dying from cancer. And it really, really impacted me and other friends whose kids were, still going through. And so I didn't plan to leave my job, my law firm, but I started to really learn. So because the resolution of his tumor was so unusual, it got picked up by it was on the front page at the AJC, it's a miracle, and it got picked up by the Associated Press and it just ran a lot of places. And then we got a call from a writer for Good Housekeeping magazine who said, I'd really like to write the story. And we were, I was just feeling guilty and said, well, okay, you can write it if you'll do if you want to help to help, and let's try to direct it to a way people can help. And she said, great, I'll do that. Like, who do you want to put in the little box, how you can help? And I said, I don't know. I'll figure that out. So that's what really led me to start researching, what are we doing about childhood cancer? Who's leading the charge? That's when I realized, wait a minute, nobody's leading the charge. Like, nobody. I thought surely the big cancer organizations have a big effort, to help these kids. And I just couldn't believe it when I learned that, in fact, they really are focused on cancers that affect adults for good reasons. But I couldn't believe it when I learned that we're doing so little about childhood cancer. And so that, coupled with having friends whose kids were really suffering, just led to this. It was an internal thing. I just couldn't, not do something. And so, it's a long story, but I originally had an opportunity to work with a national nonprofit that was in the childhood cancer space out of Washington, D.C. So I took a leave from my firm in 2004 to work with that. And that's where I really learned a lot about nonprofits. But felt after about a year and a half that wasn't for me, because it wasn't really mission focused. It wasn't as I guess I felt that it needed to be. So I left that and decided to join Cure in 2006. So that's how I got there. It took some time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it speaks to who you are and your heart, and that you care from everything that you saw, right? And I think it's also, kind of ingenuity that you went down that path the way you did and ended up here. When you joined Cure as CEO, was there anything that just surprised you just right off the bat as you dove into this entire role?
That's a funny question. Everything surprised me. I think that so Cure was very small, and when I joined, I was the third person. Our budget was about $800,000. The organization was doing a lot of good, but I felt when I really got into it, like it was like a mile wide and an inch deep, and I really, when some board members came to me and said, we really want to take the organization to the next level. Originally, I was like, well, this isn't what I want to do. Like, I want to cure this disease, and this is a tiny little organization, and I need to be a part of a bigger effort, right? And as I thought about it, I just felt like one of the things that had bothered me with the national nonprofit was that I was too far. I felt like I wasn't in the trenches with the families, and that the organization wanted to hold the families at arm's length because they were emotional. They were, some of them were broken, were angry, of course, right? But those parents, they were and are the biggest champions. Like, they are, you can't hold them at arm's length. And I knew I needed to be in the trenches with them, and Cure allowed me to do that. And I felt like, you know what, maybe what I have to do, maybe what I should do is what I can do, and this is what I can do. So I will do what I can do here in this role. So I was very surprised to learn that not all the board was on board with growing and taking the organization to the next level. The leaders were, but not everybody was. And for a while, including the two employees that were there at the time, I think at least one of them really kind of liked things the way they were. And so, leading change can be very difficult. And I changed a lot. I felt like if we're going to grow and be a serious effort, we've got to get our house in order. We've got to decide who we want to be and what we want to do. And I felt very strongly we needed to be an inch wide and a mile deep. And so, I mean, I changed a lot of things, and there were a lot of people in those early days that really didn't like that and felt like what I was doing was not the right thing, was too corporate. I heard that a lot. We're getting too corporate. And I think what I tried to do was just stay focused on my why. And I knew that every decision I made was with those kids in mind. And I knew I'd get it wrong, but I could go home and look at myself in the mirror and sleep at night if I knew that they were my center, my focus. And I had some really good friends, really, who were parents of kids that I had known, who encouraged me and said, it's really easy to like be the critic, right, from the sideline. It's really easy. And but you're the one in there. You're the one that's living this every day, and your heart is broken every day, and you're helping families through their darkest moments, and let the critics be the critics, and that, I think that really helped me a lot in those early years.
Well, anyone that may be thinking, well, now Cure is so big, how do you reach out and reach every family? I have seen that you guys are still doing that. You're still boots on the ground. And I've heard stories of you yourself. You're still boots on the ground. You're in the hospitals. You're seeing families. You're helping families move. Anyone who watched our conversation with Rick Thompson, he said that you were there helping them move when they needed you. I mean, that's a testament to you that you guys still are reaching out there. Tell me a little bit more about what you do for families.
It's so funny when I know people see us, right? It's a snapshot in time. So they see now $14 million, 32 people. But I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of grounded in the experience all along. So yes, we have more people, but we're doing so much more. You can always do more and do better when you have more resources. And I think, so now there are, I mean, when I joined Cure, there were 200 and something families a year diagnosed at, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Now there are over 500 diagnosed at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. We're in Augusta, where there are another 50 a year diagnosed who are treated there, and in Savannah, where there are another 50 a year diagnosed. So you've got over 600 kids a year diagnosed in Georgia, and it's a lot more than when I started. And so, yes, we have a bigger team because those families need us to. And I really believe that the best way to support the families is being boots on the ground with them, really getting to know them. Like, I knew what the Thompsons needed. Like, I knew that they were what was going on with them, and I mean, it was nothing to just go help them in that moment the way they needed. And so if we don't really know the families, then we can't do that. We don't know what they need. And so that our team has grown, but that's, the reason. And so we are in the hospitals. So here at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, about 90% of all kids with cancer in Georgia come here at least at some point. So we feel like being there, we're going to see and meet most families. But we also have one person in Augusta and two who work with families directly in Savannah. And so, we really do try to get to know them and understand what they need. We are serving meals in the hospital 3 to 4 days a week. And that allows the families to get out of their rooms. It keeps the parents from eating the crumbs off the kids' trays as their meal, because they don't get meals. The kids do, but the parents don't. And we have seen that our meals oftentimes are their meal for the day. Like, they can't afford, you're talking about kids that might be in the hospital for a month or longer, and they just can't afford to continue to eat in the cafeteria or DoorDash or whatever. And so we're serving them meals. We're trying to connect them with each other. That lifeline is so important. We're working with the social workers to provide emergency financial assistance because so often, if your child is really sick with cancer, somebody has to care for that child, and it is full time. So somebody is leaving work. Many people don't get paid when they don't work. And so you see this happens all the time. Wages go down, income goes down, expenses go up, and it is truly the perfect storm. So I can't tell you the number of evictions we've prevented, the number of calls to Georgia Power to say restore their power or don't turn off their power, to pay the power bills to get it back up, utilities, car payments. The number of people that just need help with gas, driving from Albany to Atlanta and back and forth, or Columbus. It can be hundreds of dollars a month just in gas. So we're trying to intervene and keep them stable through treatment. And then we also provide counseling for the parents, for the patient, the survivor, the siblings. That's another really big need, and many other things.
And I also read that you've raised over $100 million now. So that's how you're doing all of this work. And $43 million of that has gone to innovative research. What has been one of the biggest breakthroughs that you've seen through the innovative research?
Precision medicine is, without a doubt, to me, the most exciting thing, the biggest innovation. So precision medicine is what it sounds like. It's very precise treatment aimed at genetic mutations that are causing cancer to grow or allowing cancer to grow. And before precision medicine, it's been very much a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. All kids with certain kind of leukemia get the same treatment. All kids with neuroblastoma get the same treatment. And some make it and some don't. Some do well, some don't. And they didn't really know why. And so when I think it was like 2016, the head of the Pediatric Cancer Center here came to us and said, there's a better way to treat these kids. And it's called precision medicine. It's, taking the child's tumor, doing genetic mapping on it to see what's gone wrong at a genetic level, and then targeting those, those actionable mutations. And he said it's only available to kids with cancer in 2 other centers in the country, New York and Texas. And we want to bring it here to these kids. And so we said, absolutely, we want to do it. And we committed $4.5 million to build the precision medicine program and launch that here at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. It is, at the time, insurance still doesn't cover genetic sequencing for children. And let me tell you why that. Let me give you a point of comparison that, to me, just shows how crazy it is. When a woman is diagnosed with breast cancer, you have to know, does she have the BRCA gene? What are the genetics? And it's done as it's a diagnostic standard of care, right? It's everybody has that. The same is not done for children, even though you can find out the same kind of thing. Like this treatment isn't going to work for this child because of what is causing the growth. And if we don't know that, and we're just throwing one-size-fits-all treatment at all women with breast cancer get the same treatment, what's going to happen. So why aren't we doing that in children? We're not. And so insurance doesn't cover the sequencing. So Cure stepped in to cover this cost of that, so the doctors have the information they need. And so this has been now in place. It was launched in 2017. Over 500 kids here have had genetic sequencing done with our funds. And there are children alive today because of this that would absolutely not be here without it. And I'm so proud that we were able to do that we were able to bring that here to the children here. And the center has really become a leader in the space. So they're really, really working to educate other institutions and teach them how to build precision medicine programs so that this is available to all kids everywhere.
Is there any lobbying movement going on right now to try and get insurance to have to pay for that sort of genetic sequencing or anything?
There's a lot of lobbying going on for funding and so forth. It's a tough time. It's a really difficult time, and back in January there was bipartisan support for millions of dollars of childhood cancer funding, and it got cut from the budget, and it hasn't been put back in at this point. So we're lobbying, but it's tough. And my personal my feeling is that we cannot wait on the government to do the right thing and insurance companies to do the right thing. Like, eventually, I think insurance companies will cover this for kids, but they're not right now. And so we have to do it while we lobby, right, and try to get them to do it. So that's what we are focused on right now, is making sure that today's kids have what they need.
What percentage of cancer funding goes to children?
It's so minuscule. So it's less than 4% of federally funded cancer research. Let me restate that. Less than 4% of cancer research funding from the federal government goes to look at pediatric cancers. So the main sources of funding for cancer research in general are the National Cancer Institute. That's the largest funder of cancer research in the world, and pharmaceutical companies. In pediatrics, less than 4% of that NCI funding goes to pediatric cancers, and pharmaceuticals don't invest in developing treatment for pediatric cancers because there's not a big enough market for them to make profit, and they are profit driven. So it is a really awful situation for kids, and to drive progress, it requires private philanthropy, and that's how progress is mostly driven.
Well, I think you guys are doing a good job at that so far.
Well, we're doing as much as we can, for sure.
How many drugs have been made specifically for children with cancer?
7.
7.
7 drugs have been created and FDA approved specifically for childhood cancer, compared to over 200 for cancers that affect adults.
And you think that's because there's not enough children with cancer, so it's not profitable enough for the drug companies?
I think that's why there hasn't been funding. I think that's why the NCI gives us so little money, because they're looking at cancer patients as a whole, and the kids only make up a small percentage, and so it follows the numbers. And then with pharmaceuticals, there's just not enough profit potential for them to invest. I think it's the wrong way to look at it. I think that we have to look at kids as a subset of our population, and we have to look at what are the things that threaten them most significantly. And cancer is up at the top of the list. It is the second leading cause of death behind accidents in children. So we have all kinds of laws to protect children, car seat laws, there's all kinds of laws and products. But for cancer, we're not doing really much of anything at all. And I think we have to look at that, and we have to look at, you're talking about kids who are, my son was a month old. He had a whole lifetime ahead, right? A child, in little Nash was only 3, right, when he was diagnosed, and there's a lifetime ahead. And so I think we just have to look at it a little differently, and that's definitely how I feel about it. It's the incidences have been rising for the last 40 years, so the problem is becoming bigger. And there are kids, and we just, it's such a threat, and we have to be doing more.
Is there any research to support those 7 drugs that they're more effective than the adult cancer drugs that are being used on kids?
Well, yes, there's anytime a drug is designed specifically for a disease, it's going to work better than drugs that are forced, to work. Now, I will say this, with the precision medicine, there have been some surprises. Like, we had a child recently who, they had a brain tumor, and they found that he had a mutation that lung cancer patients sometimes have. And so there was a drug that was developed already to target that mutation because it's a cancer adults get, so there's investment. And they were able to give it to that child, and it's worked so far for him. So I think that you don't want, if you are diagnosed with breast cancer, you don't want a drug that was made for thyroid cancer. You don't want a doctor trying to force that to work for you. But that has been what the kids have been left with.
And Cure has reported some progress in terms of early detection and potentially prevention. Can you go into detail about that?
Well, I think prevention is tough because I think that we don't know why kids get cancer. There's more coming out about that. I think there was a really recent study that showed that, and I'm really glad to see this, that finally it's come out in a scientific paper, that toxins, right, environmental exposures there is a scientific link between exposures and pediatric cancer. And the other thing that we're learning with the advent of precision medicine is that, anywhere from 10 to 30% of childhood cancers are inherited. They're hereditary genetic mutations. Now, when my son was diagnosed, back in 2001, so quite a long time ago, they did not think that pediatric cancers were hereditary. The doctors told us it's just bad luck. But now we know that actually that's not so. And that part of our funding with precision medicine is testing these kids who are diagnosed for these predisposition genes, because if you find that they do have one and that's what's, predispose them to that diagnosis, you can start testing. You can test the siblings and the parents, and you can monitor them, start right away monitoring them, and you can discover that, at the first sign of anything, you can treat them, which then is going to lead to much better outcomes. So that's been a huge development that's come out of precision medicine. But otherwise, I think it's tough to prevent childhood cancer. That's why we've got to have measures to cure these kids when they are diagnosed.
In the early detection, is there anything that parents can take home? I know that's pretty in the weeds, but is there anything parents listening right now that could take home and try and early figure out some sort of early detection?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say, I don't want to scare people. And I think that, statistically, it is unlikely it's going to happen to your child, right? It does happen. I think that, one of the difficult things about childhood cancer is that the early first symptoms mimic so many other things. They mimic, illnesses that aren't threatening, right? And so I would just say for parents, your child, and when you know something isn't right, don't let a doctor dismiss you. Don't let emergency rooms send you home. When you have that gut feeling, or it's just gone on a little too long for you, then push and be assertive and make them run tests and do blood work and do scans. And I think that's usually how it's discovered. It's that mama's gut.
Yeah, I believe it. Cure allocates some funds specifically for outdated or limited treatment, or cancers that have outdated or limited treatments. Can you go into some of those cancers and what you guys have done?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing, I'll explain that a little bit. So we try to be very strategic with everything we do. With regard to research, we know our resources are limited. And so what we've really looked at and thought about, what's the best use of our resources? Where can we have the biggest impact? And we feel like right now, if 80% of kids with cancer overall are surviving, which is a totally misleading statistic, but for now, 80% are surviving. Who are the 20% that aren't, and why aren't they surviving? So is it because there's no effective treatment for them? Is it something else, and so we prioritize research that is really aiming to, to close the gap there and get that 80% closer and closer and closer to 100%. Some of the brain tumors in particular have absolutely no effective treatment at all. If your child is diagnosed with DIPG or diffuse midline glioma, they will tell you at diagnosis how many months you can expect your child to live. And I think it breaks our hearts to know these parents who go in and get that at diagnosis, that there's no hope. So we are really, really focused on getting, there are ideas, there are more than ideas, there are some things that are promising, and we've got to get those tested and to the bedside. So that's an example of types of cancer. There's a form of leukemia that's very difficult to treat. They're high risk neuroblastoma where it's, stage 4. That's very difficult to treat. And so those are the things that we're focusing on the most right now.
You said it's a little misleading that 80%
It's totally misleading.
survive. Why? Go into detail on that.
Because survival is defined as lives for 5 years past diagnosis. And I remember a little boy that I just loved with all my heart. His name was Robert. And I remember his funeral, and his dad stood up and said, "Robert is a survivor." At his funeral, his dad said, "Robert is a survivor. He lived 7 years past diagnosis, but Robert died, but he's counted in that statistic. And these kids that relapse, after 5 years, we're certainly seeing some of that. And again, I don't want to scare people. Most kids that get, 5 years out won't. But I think the other thing that I've seen, and this is another reason why precision medicine is so important. Now that I've been doing this for 19 years, I have seen kids that went through treatment when Brandon was sick and survived and have been diagnosed with a secondary cancer down the road and have died from the secondary cancer. So a really good friend of ours, they were going through treatment for neuroblastoma at the same time. He was, I think, 3. He survived. At 16, he was diagnosed with brain tumor caused by the treatment he received, and he died at 18. And he's a survivor, right? So it's very misleading. The other thing is that the treatments that we are giving children now cause late effects. So they cause health conditions down the road. So a lot of them are cardiotoxic, can affect endocrine systems, just cognitive abilities. And so those kids, I think the statistic is like 95% of childhood cancer survivors will have some kind of chronic negative health effect by the time they're 40 years old. So if you think about it, when you're an adult and you're diagnosed at 70 or 80 with cancer, you don't have to worry about 20 years down the road. I mean, you just don't have to. But so you can focus on survival, right? And just living, beating the cancer. But for these kids, we have to think about life after cancer. And right now we have to do better and give them as little treatment as we can to cure them, but not destroy their bodies, down the road.
And that's a big piece of precision.
It's a huge piece,
right?
Because you're being so targeted, and you can realize, like, okay, with this mutation, we know it isn't going to respond to this treatment. So we don't have to give it to the child first to see, and we can give them only what we know is going to work, or, and spare that toxicity.
And you wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't have the genetic sequencing to be able to understand those mutations.
That's right.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Pivoting a little bit. Well, actually, I want to go back real quick. Why do you think we analyze that number as 80%? Why do you think that exists in that way?
That's a great question. I think we want to talk about successes, and I think, I don't know why the field defines survival as 5-year survival. That has been the way it's been done for forever. I mean, maybe not forever, but for as long as I know. And so it's just the way they define it. But I just don't think, I think it's a really outdated definition of survival and cure. That should be revisited, but
Do you have any idea of what the actual number is?
I don't. I have a lot of anecdotal information, but I don't know. I mean, like I said, I don't know how many children end up with secondary cancers, but I do know that 95% of them have a chronic health issue from the toxic treatment by the time they're 40.
Right. And that's
And 95%.
that's
I mean, that's almost all of them.
So if anyone's listening to this entire conversation today and they want to figure out how to help in the movement that is Cure Childhood Cancer, how can they help?
Well, I think there are so many ways that people can help. And of course, the number one way is support the research. And, if you understand that nobody else is doing it, and that the research community, because they aren't well resourced, they really do a lot on a shoestring. Like, you'd be surprised at how much they can do with $150,000. And so I think that you really can make a difference with just whatever it is you can do. And especially when that is pooled with other people. I think it's tough because everybody has things in their lives that are important to them. And so this isn't going to be everyone's, passion, which I completely understand. At the same time, I think, about this is something that's really threatens our kids. And when it hits a school or it hits a community, the impact is so devastating. I think you probably have experienced that yourself. And so I think just every little bit really does help. And so to me, I just feel so passionately about driving the research. Now, there are many other ways that you can help. Driving September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and so we really want to raise awareness of this problem. And I'm not really big on awareness because awareness without action to me isn't very meaningful, but we do a number of things in September. We sell these flags that people put in their yards and all across the state. And we sell 6,000 to 8,000 of these flags. And what I've heard, not only does it raise critical funds for research, but it also, I've heard families say when they drive by and they see these out there, it feels like a hug to them. So it's really showing support for them. There are a lot of ways you can help as a volunteer. We pack, snack bags and meal bags for the hospital, toiletry bags for the families in the hospital. There are so many ways that people can get involved and just help in ways that are, big and small. So our website is curechildhoodcancer.org, and you can sign up to be a volunteer, and that is a really meaningful thing as well.
That's amazing. Well, guys, you heard it. Go to curechildhoodcancer.org. And Kristin, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.